held the rusted key in my hand and felt the cold of the past climb into my bones. The door beneath the old Georgia house was iron, scored with scratches like fingernails. When soldiers broke it open in 1864, they found 23 children in the dark. Same sharp cheekbones, same pale green eyes, the same auburn shine in their hair. The oldest girl whispered, "Mistress says we are her legacy." I didn't believe the rumors until I read the hidden papers myself. A widow's neat handwriting. A coded ledger that called children seedlings and men rootstock. Dates, pairings, punishments. And one line that stabbed like a knife. The blood must stay on this land. Before we go further, if this story makes your skin crawl, subscribe right now and comment your state or city below. Tell me where you're listening from. Do places around you keep secrets like this? I'm telling this in the first person because I walked the rooms, touched the bricks, and smelled the rot from a collapsed well. I saw where the portraits once hung. I saw the scratch marks on the door. I saw the ledger that began in 1847, the year a plantation lady decided to breed power out of human lives, even with her own sons, so no one could ever leave her. Tonight, we open the door again. Question is, when blood writes the family record, who gets to erase it, the master, the law, or the people who refuse to be owned? I was 28 when death changed everything. My husband, Catherine Thornhill, went into the ground in February of 1847, fevered and drowning in debt. What he left me was not a fortune but a ruin. A house with a leaking roof, fields too thin for cotton, and creditors circling like vultures. Most widows of Burke County would have gone back to their father's house, humbled and dependent. But not me. I would not return to Augusta with shame on my shoulders. I would not live under another man's roof, whispered about as the widow who lost her inheritance. No! If Thornhill Estate was to survive, I would find a way. And in that desperation, a thought came like a spark in dry straw. I could not afford to buy new workers. But I could make them. Not with chance couplings in the slave quarters. Not with time and luck. No, I would design them. A line of children born here, tied by blood to me and to this land. A workforce that could never be sold away, never escape, because their very existence would be my legacy. The men would be chosen carefully, strong, healthy, obedient. I would call them rootstock. The children I bore would be my seedlings. That's what I wrote in my ledger, hidden in cipher so no visitor could guess. Plantings, harvests, cultivation, words that disguised human lives as if they were rows of corn. And my own sons, they too were part of the plan. Richard, from Jonathan's first wife, only 16, pale and weak but bound to me by law. And the children yet unborn, I would raise them as heirs and breeders both. Family, property, and labor, all twisted together so no chain could ever break. People will ask how I dared, but tell me, what choice did I have, to give up everything, to live in shame? No. I chose survival, and survival is never gentle. That spring I summoned Isaac, the strongest of the men, into the house. The candlelight trembled on the walls. He stood silent, knowing refusal meant a whipping or worse. I told myself it was necessary. I told myself it was destiny. When I felt the first signs of pregnancy, I wrote with a steady hand. Initial cultivation successful. Harvest expected December. And so the plan began. 1847, Burke County, Georgia. A widow facing ruin decides not to sell her land. She decides to breed it into profit, through flesh, through blood, even through her own sons. Audience prompt. If you were trapped in that house, do you stay silent or would you risk death to expose the truth? December came cold and sharp that year, and with it my first harvest. My boy, born with pale skin and green eyes that mirrored mine. I named him Jonathan after his dead father, though I knew full well the true father was Isaac. A man sold like cattle, but chosen like seed. The county clerk recorded the child as issue of property, nothing more than another enslaved infant. But inside my house I dressed him in linen, rocked him beneath portraits of the Thornhill line, and whispered to him, "You are the future." But Richard, my stepson, watched me with narrowed eyes. He was 16, brittle as a winter branch, and already too clever for his own good. He had sat at his father's bedside all through that fevered January. He knew there had been no union between me and a dying man. The calendar betrayed me, and Richard could count. He saw Isaac leaving the house at odd hours. He noticed the ledger I kept locked in my desk. He began to spend long hours in the library, studying, watching, waiting. I told myself he was just a boy, but boys grow into men, and men can ruin everything. By the next summer, I carried again, another seedling planted, another lie prepared. The midwife, Mrs. Grayson, came at night with quiet hands and a face that asked no questions. She received her payment in gold and silence, and the cycle continued. Richard grew pale, restless. He whispered to servants. He lingered by doorways. He had once begged me to teach the slaves to read, a dangerous softness. Now he pressed himself against the library walls, eavesdropping, trying to stitch together my secrets. One evening I confronted him. "Richard," I said evenly, slicing bread with calm hands, "have you been in my study?" His face flushed. "No, ma'am." "Good," I replied, my eyes on his. "Because family loyalty is everything. And betrayal, Richard, is a disease that rots from the inside." He said nothing, but I saw the fear in his eyes. Not of me, of what he suspected me to be. I smiled, because fear is a chain stronger than iron. 1848, Georgia. The first child is born, the lie spreads, and Richard Thornhill begins to suspect that his stepmother's legacy is built on something far darker than cotton. If you uncovered such a secret, would you risk your life to expose it or bury it to survive? The Thornhill house had many locked drawers, but no lock is safe from a desperate boy. Richard found the ledger in late summer, buried beneath neat stacks of receipts and folded letters. A small brass key, carelessly left, opened the drawer. The book was bound in brown leather, its pages filled with odd symbols, not words but substitutions. It took Richard 3 nights, a candle stub, and his stubborn mind to see through the code. What he uncovered made his blood turn to ice. Rootstock Subur 1. Isaac. Strong frame, steady disposition. Planting successful. Harvest expected December. Rootstock number 2. Thomas. Teeth good. Back unbroken. Suitable for future cultivation. Seedlings to remain in house. To be paired in time. He read page after page, his hands trembling. His stepmother had written out a breeding plan, charting her own children like livestock, mapping their futures in lines and pairings. Words for weather, for blood, for bodies used as soil. Richard copied a few pages, translating the cipher. He planned to write to his grandfather in Augusta. Maybe even to the county judge. Somebody had to know. Somebody had to stop her. But Catherine always knew. At supper, she cut her meat with steady hands and said without looking up, "Richard, my papers seem disturbed. You haven't been in my study, have you?" His heart thudded. He forced the words out. "No, ma'am," she laid her fork down gently. "Good, because if anyone betrayed my trust, if family turned against family, I would have to act. Do you understand?" Richard nodded, his throat dry. She smiled then, thin as a blade. That night he burned the copied pages in his room, but he couldn't burn what he had seen. He couldn't unlearn the truth. His stepmother was creating children not to love but to use, weaving chains of blood and bone stronger than iron shackles. And worse, he knew she had seen the fear in his eyes. Catherine Thornhill never let fear go unanswered. 1849, Burke County. A boy finds his stepmother's journal and uncovers a horror. A plantation where blood itself is shackled. If you discovered this ledger, would you stay silent or risk your life to send it to the world? It started with tiredness. By late summer of 1849, Richard could barely keep his eyes open past midday. His books blurred before him. His appetite faded. At first he thought it was nerves or grief, or just the weight of the house pressing on him. Then came the cramps. His hands shook. His muscles weakened. Some mornings he could not rise from his bed. Catherine hovered, all sympathy. She brought his meals herself on a silver tray. Broths, porridges, and a bitter tonic she insisted he swallow with every bowl. She even summoned Mrs. Grayson, the midwife, who shook her head solemnly and called it consumption. But Richard had read enough in the library to know better. In one old volume of medical essays, he had seen the word arsenic, pale powder, tasteless, slipped into food. Symptoms: weakness, stomach pain, wasting of the flesh. He realized with a horror colder than fever, his stepmother was poisoning him. One night, when the pain had him doubled over, Catherine sat beside his bed, smoothing his damp hair. "Your father's cousin died at your age," she whispered. "Tuberculosis," they said. "Some families are cursed with weakness." Richard tried to speak, but his tongue felt heavy, his breath shallow. Her green eyes glowed in the lamplight, calm, patient, merciless. He made one last effort. With shaking hands, he wrote a letter to his grandfather in Augusta, telling everything about the ledger, the seedling children, the poisons. He sealed it and gave it to a young servant girl named Pearl, begging her to deliver it in secret. But Pearl was terrified. That night she slipped into Catherine's room, placed the letter on the mistress's desk, and confessed. Catherine read it silently, then carried it upstairs. She stood over Richard's bed, the letter burning between her fingers. "The fever is turning your mind," she said sweetly. Then she dropped it into the fireplace. Flames devoured the only proof he had. 3 days later, Richard was dead. The doctor wrote consumption on the certificate. The neighbors shook their heads at the tragedy of a boy so young. Catherine wore black and wept with practiced grace. 4 days after the funeral, she gave birth to a healthy son. She named him Jonathan. The county clerk accepted the story of an early birth without question. One Thornhill buried. One Thornhill born. The plan continued. 1849, Georgia. Richard Thornhill dies before 17. His stepmother's poison silenced the only witness, and her next seedling takes his place. If you were Pearl, the servant girl with that letter, would you risk your life to deliver it or give it to the mistress to survive? The years after Richard's death looked from the outside like a miracle. Thornhill Estate, once drowning in debt, began to steady itself. Cotton Rose looked neat again. Debts were paid down. Visitors whispered that the widow Thornhill must be blessed with uncommon strength. They never saw what blessedness cost. Between 1849 and 1856, I bore 7 more children. 3 girls, 4 boys, each one carefully chosen, each one recorded in my coded ledger. Isaac was sent away after his usefulness ended, sold downriver for cash to clear a creditor. Other men took his place, Thomas with his wide shoulders, Samuel with his steady eyes. They entered my house at night under candlelight, silent, unwilling, knowing refusal meant blood and whip. Mrs. Grayson's hands delivered every infant. She also did the darker work. When enslaved women conceived outside of my chosen pairings, she ended those pregnancies with bitter teas and cruel hands. She told them it was nature, but they knew better. Whispers spread through the quarters of babies lost before they drew breath, of women left hollow-eyed. One named Ruth tried to resist. She fled into the pine forest, belly already round. Dogs dragged her back. 2 men held her down while the midwife forced herbs into her mouth. She lived, but something inside her broke. Within 2 years, she was dead. The plantation divided itself like a body with 2 hearts. Out in the quarters, 20 men and women bent their backs to the soil. In the main house, my special children wore clean linen, ate from porcelain, and learned to read the letters I sketched in chalk. They did not know yet that they were mine. They believed the story I told them. Abandoned orphans I had taken in out of charity. But the enslaved people knew. They saw the faces of their own fathers in the children I raised. They saw me measure heights, check teeth, note temperaments as though tallying cattle. They saw the way I smiled, a cold farmer watching a crop grow tall. By 1856, the house held 10 of them, green-eyed, auburn-haired, marked with my blood and the blood of those I had forced. They were a quiet flock, taught obedience and patience. But even obedience grows cracks when secrets are buried too long. The quarters carried grief like a second language. Mothers wept for children lost. Fathers bore scars of forced couplings. And everyone waited for the next command. They whispered in the dark that one day the balance would tip. I told myself I was saving them all, building a future where no one could be sold away, a family that could never be broken. But the truth was already written in the silence of the quarters. Family built on chains is no family at all. 1856, Georgia. Thornhill Estate looks prosperous, but its walls hide a growing brood of special children. and a trail of broken bodies in the quarters. If you were one of those fathers, forced to watch your child raised as property, would you endure in silence or would you risk everything to fight? By 1859, the Thornhill house had a new wing, a place I told visitors was for records and storage, but it was never meant for guests. It was meant for memory, for my legacy. I called it the Heritage Room. The walls were lined with shelves. On them sat my leather-bound journals, 3 by that year, each filled with coded entries of seedings and harvests, rootstock and pairings. Beside them rested glass vials, each holding a small lock of hair, labeled with name and date. My children's hair, taken from their first cuts, preserved like relics of saints. On the great table in the center, I spread charts inked with lines and names. Not true family trees, but planned ones. Jonathan paired to Rachel, Eleanor to Marcus, Isaac's boy, Margaret to Samuel's nephew. Arrows and notes, strong lungs, good teeth, obedient temperament. It looked like the records of horse breeders, but the names were my own flesh. I would walk the room at night, oil lamps flickering, my fingers brushing across paper, feeling as though I had built something eternal. A dynasty not just of land, but of blood engineered to remain tied to Thornhill forever. But secrets pressed like heavy air. The house servants avoided the east wing. The children, my special ones, were never allowed inside, and yet they sensed it. They saw the way I measured them, noted their growth, recorded their tempers. They whispered among themselves when they thought I could not hear. In the quarters, suspicion had long since hardened into certainty. Mothers recognized the curve of their children's jaws, the eyes too much like theirs, the silence too much like mine. They whispered to each other, "She thinks she made family, but she only made chains." And still I pressed forward. Each birth, each death, each secret recorded in my room of shadows. One evening, my eldest daughter, Eleanor, lingered by the east wing door. She was 14 then, sharp-eyed, always questioning. "What's in there, Mama?" She asked. "Family history," I said, voice smooth as glass. "Nothing for children to worry about." She tilted her head, those green eyes catching mine with a depth that unsettled me. She did not ask again, not then, but her silence felt heavier than any question. In the Heritage Room, I lit another lamp, opened my ledger and wrote, "Legacy secure. First generation nearly ripe, second generation anticipated, and yet for the first time my hand trembled." 1859, Burke County. Behind closed doors, a mistress builds a shrine of journals, vials, and bloodlines. A temple to cruelty disguised as family. If you discovered a locked room in your home filled with charts of your future, who you must marry, when you must bear children, would you obey, or would you burn it all? The house was quiet that spring of 1863, too quiet. War thundered in the distance, but inside Thornhill, silence ruled, until one girl found a book she was never meant to touch. Eleanor. 14, restless, hungry for knowledge. She had always lingered by my desk, asking questions sharper than any knife. One afternoon, while helping me sort papers, her fingers brushed a journal I had forgotten to lock. The brown leather one. My ciphered record. That night, under candlelight in her room, she puzzled over the strange marks, the same way Richard once had. She scratched letters onto scraps of paper, shifting symbols until words took shape. And then the truth unfolded like a wound. Second planting, rootstock Thomas, age 21. Strong frame. Anticipate harvest October, her eyes filled with fire. Thomas, one of the men in the fields. The man who never spoke, who carried scars on his back. He was her father, and I, her mother, had lied to her all her life. She kept reading. Pages of charts, pairings, futures already decided. Her name tied by a line to Isaac's unborn son. Margaret paired to Samuel's nephew. Abigail marked for early planting. When she confronted me, her voice shook with rage. "I know what you are. I know what I am." I told her the truth with cold precision. "Yes, I am your mother. Yes, I bred you with chosen men. Yes, you will continue this work because the alternative is worse. You could be sold, separated, destroyed. Here, you stay together. Here, you survive." She trembled, but she obeyed for the moment. Yet something had cracked wide open. Eleanor whispered the truth to Jonathan first. He resisted her words, too deep in my teachings. insisting I had given them better lives. But Abigail listened, and Margaret too. Soon 4 of my children looked at me not with obedience but with calculation. Their silence grew heavy, their stares sharper, and in the quarters the whispers multiplied. Hope, Anna, and the older women nodded at Eleanor when she lingered near the cabins, as though they sensed she carried their secret now, too. The house no longer belonged to me alone. My own children had become watchers, carrying a truth I could not erase, and truth once spoken is more dangerous than any chain. 1863 Thornhill Estate. Eleanor reads her mother's ciphered journal and sees her fate written in ink. The children awaken, and the first cracks split the cage. If you discovered your mother had bred you like livestock, would you keep her secret, or would you risk your life to expose her? Rebellion often begins with one step into the dark. Her name was Grace, 17, heavy with child, forced into a pairing she did not want. She slipped away one humid night in August 1863, running east toward the Savannah River, clinging to the hope of Union lines. By dawn, the dogs had her. They dragged her back bloodied, eyes wide with terror. I gathered everyone, the field hands, the house servants, and most importantly my children. The yard between the mansion and the cabins filled with silence so deep, you could hear the cicadas stop. Grace was tied to a post, her swollen belly pressed against the wood. I stood on the porch, voice sharp as the lash. This woman betrayed her family. She sought to abandon her duty, and for betrayal there is only one price. Old Kendrick, the overseer, raised the whip. 20 lashes cracked across her back. With each strike, my children flinched. Abigail covered her ears. Jonathan clenched his fists. Eleanor did not move, but her eyes burned into me like fire. When it ended, Grace collapsed, barely breathing. I turned to the children. Remember this. Loyalty is survival. Disobedience is death. But instead of binding them to me, I had loosened something I could not see. That night, whispers stirred in the quarters like wind through dry grass. Whispers that the mistress was afraid, that she would spill blood to keep her house of lies standing. And if she feared them, then maybe the power was not hers alone. Eleanor listened. She crept close to the cabins, hearing Hope and Anna murmur, "She thinks pain will keep us quiet. But pain teaches us to wait." Even my younger ones sensed it. Margaret wept in her room, asking Abigail why Mama hurt Grace. Abigail's answer was a whisper, "Because Mama knows she can be broken too." Fear no longer worked the way it once had. I had shown my hand too clearly. I had meant to carve obedience into flesh, but what I carved instead was proof that I could be resisted. In the stillness after Grace's screams faded, a seed was planted, one that would grow in silence, watered by rage. And though I locked my journals tighter and walked my heritage room at night with trembling hands, I could not unhear the whispers in my own house. 1863 Burke County, Grace's blood stains the ground, but instead of fear, it breeds fury. Catherine's children and the quarters alike begin to dream of a breaking point. If you stood in that yard, forced to watch, would you bow your head to survive, or would you let the rage take root? The war crept closer with every rumor. By 1863, even the pine forests of Burke County trembled with talk. Vicksburg had fallen, Gettysburg lost, Sherman marching. Men in gray passed through hungry, ragged, their voices heavy with despair. The quarters listened. Every word of defeat was a seed of hope. "The Yankees are coming," they whispered. "Freedom's on the road." But in the house, I heard the whispers too. I knew what Union boots would mean, the end of everything I had built. 16 years of careful seedings, records inked in cipher, children raised under my hand, gone in a stroke of war. So I pressed harder. I told myself there was no time to waste. Jonathan, just 15. I forced into pairing with Rachel, a 16-year-old girl from the fields. I staged it as a wedding in the parlor, with candles and vows that meant nothing. He obeyed, too well schooled in loyalty to question, while Rachel's silence broke the room like a sob. Eleanor watched with clenched jaw. Abigail gripped her hand until their fingers went white. They knew. They had seen the charts, read the codes, felt the truth in their marrow. In the quarters, the pairing spread like wildfire. Mothers held their daughters tighter. Fathers stood in doorways at night, staring toward the house with eyes that burned. And still, I wrote in my ledger, Pairing commenced. Harvest anticipated, but my children were no longer children. They moved together in hallways, whispering when I turned my back. Jonathan began to falter, his faith in me shaken by Eleanor's sharp tongue. She is not protecting us. She is using us. The storm grew thicker each day. The enslaved waited for Union banners. My children waited for their chance. And I, walking the heritage room with trembling hands, waited for some way to hold it all together. But every storm breaks. And when it does, it is never on the mistress's terms. 1863 Burke County. Confederate defeats bring hope to the enslaved and fear to Catherine. Forced pairings, whispered rebellions, and the storm of war gather in the air. Few knew freedom was coming, but slowly. Would you wait, or would you strike before it arrived? March 17th, 1864. The night the storm broke, I gathered them all, Jonathan, Eleanor, Abigail, Margaret, Samuel, William, Henry, Caroline, and the younger babes. 11 in total, my legacy, my proof. We lit the lamps in the heritage room, the shelves glowing with vials of hair, the charts of pairings stretching across the walls. I told them the truth plain. The war may end badly. The Yankees may come. They will try to take you, to scatter you, to destroy us. Will not allow it. From a locked chest, I drew glass bottles filled with clear liquid. Laudanum, in small doses, mercy. In larger ones, escape. Better eternal peace than being cast out. You are mine. You will stay mine. Jonathan stepped forward, taller than I remembered, his voice breaking. No, Mama, I read your journals. You lied, you bred us like cattle. We are not yours, I struck him, my hand trembling. Ungrateful child. Everything I built was for you. But Eleanor's voice cut sharper than any whip. You built nothing but chains. For the first time I saw it in their faces, unity. They stood together, even the little ones, pulled by a truth stronger than my fear. I had lost them. I clutched the journals to my chest, the vials rattling. If they would not follow, then the record would outlive them. I ran through the house, out into the night, toward the cabins. The quarters spilled open. Faces appeared in the firelight. Hope, Anna, Thomas, Samuel. Eyes hard with years of silence. They saw me clutching the proof of their suffering. They saw their children's names scrawled in my ledgers. Shouts rose. Hands grabbed. The papers tore, pages scattering into mud. Vials shattered underfoot, strands of hair floating away in the night air. I screamed, "This is my legacy! You cannot erase me." But the fire caught the charts and smoke curled into the dark. What happened next was never written. Some said Hope struck first. Others whispered it was Thomas. Some swore, many hands moved as one. All agreed on only this. Mistress Thornhill disappeared into the night. Her body was never found. By dawn, the heritage room was ash, the ledgers gone, the vials broken, the mistress erased. And in the silence after, the quarters stood taller. March 1864, Georgia. Catherine Thornhill runs into the night clutching her legacy. By morning, she is gone, and the people she enslaved carry the weight of justice unspoken. If you lived on that plantation, would you have stayed silent as she vanished, or would you have raised your voice to tell the world what you saw? By dawn of March 18, 1864, Thornhill Estate was a different place. The mistress was gone, vanished into smoke and whispers. The heritage room lay in ashes, the ledgers destroyed. The vials smashed. The overseer, old Kendrick, rode into Westboro and told the sheriff the tale he thought safest. The widow must have fled, fearing the Yankees. It was a lie the county was willing to accept. Few wished to dig deeper. In the quarters, no one spoke aloud of that night. Silence was their shield. Justice, once done, needed no retelling. A year later, Union soldiers swept through Burke County. They found the plantation half empty, its mistress listed as missing. In the cellar of the main house, they discovered 23 children locked behind an iron door. Pale eyes, auburn hair, some barely old enough to walk, others already scarred by silence. Captain Reynolds noted them in a confidential letter. Evidence of systematic breeding too grotesque to detail. He ordered his men to say nothing. The children were taken in by freed families, their names scattered to the wind. Jonathan, Eleanor, and the older ones stayed for a time, but the land itself was poisoned with memory. By 1867, Eleanor moved to Savannah, working needle and thread. never speaking of her mother again. Jonathan tried to farm the soil until it turned against him, then drifted west, carrying a notebook scrawled with one phrase over and over. I did not choose this. The estate decayed. The roof caved. The oak split. By 1871, a fire licked the walls to black. In the ruins, a well-digger struck bone. A woman's skeleton, skull fractured. A corroded locket clutched to her ribs. The record read, Unknown female, former Thornhill land. But the freed families knew. Mistress had been buried where she could not command another soul. Whispers carried through generations. In churches and kitchens, old women told children, some chains are broken not by law, but by blood's demand for justice. By the 20th century, only fragments remained. A letter hidden in courthouse files, a confession from a dying man in Alabama, a granddaughter's memoir calling her the devil mistress. Historians circled the story, but the county histories kept Thornhill's name silent, erased as though it had never been. And yet silence is never whole. Somewhere in Georgia, descendants walk with green eyes and auburn hair, unaware that their blood carries both the cruelty of a mistress and the survival of those who defied her. Today, the land is fields and pine. No marker, no monument, just soil that remembers what people tried to forget. If you walk there at dusk, locals say, you might hear chains rattling in the wind, or a woman's voice whispering through the moss, still trying to claim a legacy that was torn from her hands. But the truth is simple. Her legacy was not bloodlines or ledgers. Her legacy was her erasure. The people she tried to bind unbound her name, her story, her very bones. And in that silence lies the truest kind of justice. 1847 to 1864. One woman tried to breed a dynasty of chains. In the end, the enslaved she sought to own wrote the final chapter. Do you think history remembers the truth, or only what the powerful choose to erase? If this story unsettled you, if you care about the histories buried under fields and forgotten walls, subscribe now. Comment your city or state below, and share this with someone who needs to know the past is never as far behind as we'd like to believe.